Good day, viewers. Welcome to a new edition of 30 Minutes, the interactive program of Trust Television with me, Manir Dan Ali. Our guest today has been described as a public intellectual, an activist of some sort, and also a humanitarian person, administrator in so many different areas. He's been the country director of CARE, of Action Aid, and a number of others. He's currently secured an appointment with Save the Children in Ethiopia. I'm talking about none other than Dr. Hussaini Abdu. Doctor, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
You recently wrote expressing concern about all the calls we've been hearing from some big quarters, including retired General T.Y. Danjuma, the former Minister of Defense, former Army Chief, and what have you, where essentially he's been arguing for years that people should defend themselves. And this is something that has been gaining traction in other quarters. People are saying that, look, the problem of insecurity requires people to really take up arms and protect themselves. But you seem to have some contrary view on that. I want you to share it with our audience.
Yes, I do have some contrary views, and these views are informed by my involvement in conflict-related matters across Africa and Latin America, by the study that I have also conducted extensively, and also my work around around vigilantism. For our viewers, vigilantism became a major issue in Nigeria in the 80s with the escalation of crimes, largely urban crimes, particularly armed robbery, burglary, and thefts in urban areas, and communities learned to organize themselves and ensure that they go on a regular patrol, working with the police, and even under military rule, working with the police to defend their communities.
So it was something that arose out of that particular challenge?
Yeah, that particular challenge. But if you stress it further, you may actually even relate it to some of the situation in the colonial time and immediate post-colonial time, particularly for those who followed the politics of northern Nigeria, the concept of Mbanga, which is actually Mvangat, and which were largely associated with the NEPU at that time as part of their self-defense against the aggression of the Native Authority and the MPC during their campaigns. And so they set up a mechanism to defend themselves.
So that they are not attacked by probably thugs or people sponsored by the other side.
By the other side. That was how today you hear in Hausa we talk about Mbanga, but they were basically vanguards. They were vanguards of the party, and they were largely young people. But that was completely different. But by 80s, with that escalation, we began to see it. But I also know very well in Latin America what vigilantism has done, where as crises escalate in countries like Colombia and people begins to organize self-help and all that, and that self-help almost resulted for about 30 years of collapse of the Colombian state. We've seen different formations of this during the war in Liberia and during the war in Sierra Leone, some of the crises in Somalia, what is going on today in South Sudan. It just does not help. And if I want to come down to Nigeria to use the example, like I said in that article, some of the escalations we have experienced in some, whether it's in Zamfara or it's in Plateau, as recent, even the recent one, or in Benue, we're all informed by vigilantism, because the vigilante structure is often exclusive. You design it in a manner that people who portray themselves as victims organize, and they organize exclusively for amongst themselves. And
thus they exclude the other side. Any other person other than themselves.
Right. And so therefore self-defense actually ends up becoming an aggression. And so when you go and in the course of claiming self-defense you attack, the other side also come back with more vengeance. And we have seen that in Zamfara. It led to a level, I think in the last 10 years, where there was a perception that the vigilante were largely Hausa, predominantly Hausa, and in most cases even supported by government, against the other side.
Who are predominantly Fulani.
And so, and when they do that, and the Vigilante Act, they go to the extent of fishing out people with a Fulani look, even from market, and exert jungle justice on them. And then the other side organized, and they attack. And when the reports are coming, the action of the vigilante is never noticed. It is the action of the other side that is often seen. And that's what we have seen even with Plateau, the recent situation in Plateau, what has been happening in Benue, and all that. And there are several examples across the country that you can give. Look, if you check even in Lagos, in the early part of this Fourth Republic, the whole thing about OPC,
the Odua
People's Congress. It was also
attacking non-Yoruba
element. It was still part of this whole vigilante culture because it is organized along certain primordial lines, whether you call it a community or you call it an ethnic group or a religious group or it's a village thing. At the end of the day, it creates this tit-for-tat thing. That's one dimension. The second dimension is that they are untrained. And when they are untrained, and training is not simply about the use of arms. It's also about a certain element of accountability. And then the appreciation and recognition of other people's fundamental human rights. And so when you do that and you just throw them out and you arm them, they commit those actions with impunity.
But what do people do? Because people are like pressed to the wall.
Yes.
There is so much insecurity. People cannot go to their farms. You can travel certain roads as we speak cannot be, traversed.
Yeah.
And what have you. So should people just fold up their arms and watch?
No, I don't think so. And I actually recognize that in my article, that yes, it's true. People are under significant pressure. The insecurity has impacted on people's life and livelihoods. Like you mentioned, people cannot travel. And I think many of our communities are under siege. And therefore, the natural reaction of the people is to say, look, we are not getting enough from the Nigerian state. The military is not doing enough in court. The police is not doing enough in court. All our security agencies have failed us. And therefore, we have to organize to defend ourselves. And that itself, for me, is a realistic thinking. And we must respect that. But what we are saying is that it is not always the best.
And it could result in a bigger crisis.
It could result in a bigger crisis. It can give you a momentary relief. Momentary, you guard yourself, then the other side has to be careful before they come, or you have attacked them and you have killed some. But what we have seen in the culture of tit for tat, not just in Nigeria, in terms of vigilantism, is that the other side wait, they organize. When the time they realize you are losing your guard, because you are not trained, you cannot permanently remain at alert. Once they realize that you are losing your guard, they come with massive vengeance. And that's what we have seen. It is not peculiar to Nigeria. It's what happens all over the world when you are dealing with this. Look, even in South Africa, it's a major issue. So, for me, the idea is that the state has a responsibility to protect lives and property.
But it has failed.
But the state has failed. The state has failed not because it's intrinsically designed to fail. The state failed because its approach is not dynamic enough to deal with the issues. And that's what I was talking about.
But the kinetic one has been there, and also the non-kinetic. We've had incidences where whole state governments have even sat with the bandits or kidnappers or whoever the miscreants were, negotiated, and then that has collapsed. So what do we do?
The problem is that the state does not understand this. But the state also, or people leading the state institutions, are also behaving like some of us. We are under pressure. We just want security. And the state reacts to sometimes the comments we make, including our conversations like this. And then they go in there and say, oh, let's negotiate with the bandits. I think that is not what it is. The idea is that as a country, we need a new security architecture.
What does that mean?
So what that means is that a new way of looking at security. And then we look at security in these two ways: human security and physical security. And that none of these are independent of the other. And that human security dimension of it is that people's life and livelihood, their personal and their collective political economy, is a biggest determinant of their physical security. So poverty, unemployment, rural exclusion, urbanization, these are dynamics that are shaping our society. What we have seen increasingly right from the colonial time in Nigeria, we look at security from the physical side, which is basically stopping crime. Physically stopping crime. But you see, you don't stop crime only through those physical measures. You stop crime through investment in the lives and the livelihoods of the people, in their economy, in a manner that they don't have to resort to this other thing, where now crime becomes an exception.
So you address the underlying causes of
that's the issue.
Crime.
Yeah. So crime now become an exception. Then you can now use physical force to deal with exceptions. But when what's supposed to be the exception becomes the normal, you have a problem.
But the government will push back and say, well, they've been trying to open up the economy. They have been even supporting people who are unemployed. They've been giving loans to students and all of those.
Very good. Very good. That's a good argument. But you see, opening up economy, responding to people's life and livelihood is not defined by just policy pronouncement. People feel it. They have to feel it. So whatever investment, whatever thing you have put in the economy, as long as unemployment continues to increase, poverty continues to expand, inequality continues to increase, rural exclusion continues to deepen, urbanizations, and particularly unmitigated urbanizations continue to expand, you can't run away from crime. So whatever your economic policies are, it may be beautiful, it may be well designed, as long as it cannot reduce poverty, it cannot reduce unemployment, it cannot breach inequality, it cannot create responsible urbanization, and cannot effectively connect the urban to the rural, your policies are not working.
But what do you tell people who are caught up in the throes of this violence
what we tell people who are caught up in this is that we have a responsibility to continue to exert pressure and demands on the state, because that is the institution that is responsible for doing that. Second, we have to ensure that even when we need those physical mechanisms to deal with, we have to work with the state institutions in ensuring that there is effective training, there is proper accountability in dealing with some of those issues. We have to ensure that we don't resort to concept of self-help. That's what we're against. So you take Borno, for instance, with the escalation of the Boko Haram crisis, you have what they call civilian JTF.
Which many people credit with actually bringing Boko Haram
contributing to it. Yeah, yes. They did. And because they go on joint operations with the military, joint operations with the police, and in most cases, and with due respect, I used to teach in the military in the Defense Academy, and therefore I have many generals who were my students and friends. But we have seen how those young people they lead even in the battlefront. But some of us feel they are sometimes used as cannon folders, which is also not good enough. And they are not accounted for, which is a problem. Accounted for is
when you lose them, there's nobody to say that you've lost this number.
Exactly. There is nobody.
So it doesn't tell about the casualty.
It doesn't tell about the casualty. They are suffering. And that's not good enough.
Very interesting point there, but I would like us to go on a short break and resume the conversation thereafter. Viewers, it is 30 Minutes, the interactive program of Trust Television, and our guest today is Dr. Hussaini Abdu, a veteran of the civil society group in Nigeria. Welcome back. It is still 30 minutes, the interactive program of Trust Television, and our guest today is Dr. Hussaini Abdu. Doctor, before we went on break, we were discussing about how even in Borno, the use of the civilian JTF is problematic, even though many people credit it with bringing the Boko Haram insurgency into check, because they are locals, they know the terrain better, and what have you. Yet you are saying that even that is problematic because some of the casualties suffered by these people, unlike those of the military and the police, are unaccounted for.
They're unaccounted for. They are pulled in a less systematic manner. They are armed, they are young, and they are saddled with responsibilities that they are not trained for. And yes, I can understand where people who make those praise are coming from. They have contributed a lot because they understand the terrain and all that. And in the context of community approach, people can say that it's a sacrifice that people have to make to bring peace to that area, but it's 15 years.
Yeah, but people say that you need somebody who understands the locality, unlike maybe the federal troops who are from other parts of the country, who do not have emotional investment in the whole venture.
But you see, that is the problem. Emotional investment is not an asset.
It's a liability.
It's a liability. That's the problem. And that's part of the whole thing about vigilantism. Because it is emotional. It is not rational.
Because people are committed they've seen their wives,
they've seen their
livelihood, what have you. So they will fight to the last. Unlike somebody who's just taking salary.
But the problem is that they fight to the last.
On the line.
That's the problem. They always fight to the last. And that is why the casualty is always high. You are not meant to fight to the last. You are meant to fight strategically. You are meant to fight with your brain, not with your heart. And what you see is that when you see people are recruited in anger, in the spirit of vengeance, and therefore you don't get rational engagement, and we lose them so much. I don't think there is anyone in this country today, including the government of Borno State, that can tell us how many young people we lost as civilian JTF in Borno State.
But they do give frequent updates. They say that in this particular incident, this number of soldiers and this number of civilians. Are you saying that those figures are massaged?
Those are actually not real figures. Because again, there are different kinds of operations that they go. There are some operations that are actually not even joint operations with the military. There are some independent operations. And there are some of them who actually are defending communities who come because the other side comes and they raid them. But I think that even the biggest problem is not even this. When we eventually, because I know that will ultimately happen, when we get to resolve that crisis, demobilizing them and disarming them is going to be a whole set of crises. Because everywhere in the world where vigilantism becomes entrenched, like we have in Borno, because Borno has the most entrenched vigilantism lasting about 15 years, demobilizations becomes a challenge.
They are used to carrying arms they enjoy the power they have over the rest of an armed society.
Yes, exactly. Arms are generally addictive.
Like drugs.
Like drugs. Arms are addictive. Once you get used to arms, doing away with it can be a problem. So even people who are trained to carry arms, they are trained in a manner that they regularly have to do away with their arms.
So how do we deal with the problem staring us in the face? So we have this banditry, kidnapping, and what have you, that seems to be actually escalating. You are mentioning even Borgu in central Nigeria, now in Kwara. There's a whole swathe of area that has been taken over by these bandits and kidnappers. What do we do? Because we can't just sit and fold our arms.
We can't just sit and fold our arms, and that is the truth about it. We can't. But the reality also is that as a government or as a people, we must insist that we need to have, and like I suggested in my paper, we need a one agenda dialogue.
Dialogue.
Let's have
Talking.
Yes.
But will talking solve the problem?
No, it wouldn't solve it, but it will lead to something different. And a friend of mine who read this and who worked with an institution outside this country, and he said, you know, Hussaini, I agree with what you are saying, but I don't see the government doing it. And why? Because the whole concept of security is around physical security and it's about regime security. And at all time, everything governments do is about protecting itself. It is not about people and citizens. All the examples you have given out, without communities crying out, there is never any time government reacts. Like the Borgo example you talked about, there have been massive cry out on this. It's a whole swath of games reserve. They have been reserved. And this is what I'm currently working on, writing about the forest reserves in Nigeria. The part of the problem during colonial time, the forest reserves were created. People today talk about environmentalism, but they were not basically environmental. They were also political. The colonial authorities created them in northern Nigeria as part of the process of controlling population movement and ensuring that they are able to get tap of people and localities for both taxation and broadcast of government authorities. Because the northern Nigeria was so big for them to control effectively. And therefore you have to carve out territories, swathe of land, and say, you can't farm here, you can't fish here, you can't hunt here. We have to conserve the environment. So when they stop you from settling in those areas, you are forced to cluster in one place. And so what then happened with this crisis is that criminal element and bandits
have taken over
those locations.
Yeah.
So they took over those locations and they are massive. They are very large. Many of my friends from the southern part of the country, they tell me, oh, how can it be that somebody, bandit, they can move in such group and nobody sees them moving. But you see, they don't understand the geography and the topography of northern Nigeria. Right. That you can move rural to rural without anybody seeing you.
Except the local communities.
Except the local communities.
And who, even when they report, the authorities don't take them seriously.
Don't take them seriously. And if you go, by the time you leave your urban area or local government headquarters, you will never find a policeman anywhere. And therefore, this movement becomes easy. And that's what happened in the last 10 years, probably. There have been massive movement of this bandit in different forest reserves, including this one, the latest one that came up with the Borgu situation. And the Borgu has border with Manir Republic.
Right.
And then closer to that again is also a few meters to border with Niger Republic.
But what all this is telling us is that the criminal elements are expanding, while the authorities are sleeping. Or is it
exactly?
Or is it because of what some people are arguing, the state capture, that the state is more for some personal aggrandizement than protecting the actual state for its continued
because
existence?
The problem is that, yes, we are dealing with a major crisis of state capture. No debate about it, but this is a different conversation entirely. But we're dealing with a major state capture. But the other thing that I mentioned in my paper is that the military and the police or the security agencies are overwhelmed. They are overwhelmed.
Because the
number and facilities.
So is it a problem that can be solved by recruiting more?
Yes.
And training more?
That's exactly what I was talking about. You are a country that you are struggling with massive unemployment. And so if you are dealing with this kind of situation, instead of asking young people to organize and defend themselves, recruit them and bring them into the military.
But why is it so difficult to do so? Because even under Buhari, there's been this talk of continuous massive recruitment, but we didn't see that happen. In fact, the police were busy quarreling between one part of the police and the other, and they never...
It's part of what you are talking about. It's about state capture. Because people are looking at these things, recruitment, as part of patronage distribution. If you're a chair of the Police Service Commission, you want to be the one that is in charge so that you can bring people from your village and give them job. And then you will say, I gave them job. If you are IG of police, you think that you should be the one to do it. So that you will use your own network to bring people into the force.
Or as is often happening, You even sell some of the
which is
positions.
you sell some of the position. People buy jobs in this country. We see that young people call some of us and say, "Oh, there is job in this place, but they're asking me to bring so amount of money." I tell young people, you come and say, by the time you tell them my name, they will not even give you the job. So don't even go there. But that's the issue. So people have taken this job thing as part of patronage distribution, self-enrichment, and it's part of the capture that you are talking about. So government has to deal with issues like this. So instead of saying people should self-organize, then recruit them into these forces, because it is normal when you are dealing with an abnormal situation, because we are practically at war. So one major thing that you do during war situation is that you go on massive mobilization. So your recruitment processes will have to change.
So it's not just the periodic one.
It's not the periodic one. You have to change your recruitment process, and you have to change your recruitment number and even duration.
Maybe something akin to what happened when Nigeria was faced with a civil war.
Civil war, exactly. So that's the kind of thing you need to do. If your training of the police used to be 6 months, you have to do it 3 months. Intensive training. If the military, officers call, you have to invest in your short service. So you do that so that you can have the number.
What about talking to the bandits, this issue of signing
So there are two dimensions.
Can you briefly touch that?
There are two dimensions of it for me. And I think, yes, we can open up on the non-kinetic side, but I don't always like the policy talk around kinetic and non-kinetic and all that. My attitude to this thing is about how can we make our security have community ownership, that citizens can own the process, and that the process...
Without defending themselves with arms.
Without defending themselves with arms. Meaning owning the process is that the government organized in a manner that it gets citizens to... And these citizens include even the criminals. So for them, there are those who can be engaged. But there are those... Because I don't believe in accountability. I don't believe that somebody who has wantonly killed people, raided villages, should just go without being held to account. Because when you do that, that person is going to come back one day, or somebody will try to emulate him, because there is no consequences for such actions. And therefore, as a system, we must find a way, one, to ensure that they are not recruiting more. That's one thing. You have to stop their recruitment. The bandits are not recruiting more people. Two, how we can win and move out those who have been conscripted, because they also do conscriptions. So when you stop their mobilization and was also able to control their conscription, you isolate them. And then you find a way of holding these other ones to account. That's one dimension. The second dimension is that there is no end to accountability system. So you can engage, you can have a negotiation, you can have conversation and stop this thing. But years later, those people will still have to be held to account.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussaini Abdu. I have to stop you there because we've run out of time. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers, that's the end of this edition of 30 Minutes. Keep a date with us.